I am Anna Seewald, and this is Authentic Parenting, a podcast about personal development in the context of parenting, where I explore how you can find more calm, connection, and joy in parenting through the process of self-discovery and inner growth with a trauma-informed lens. I'm a parent educator, and my mission is to help children by helping parents. The motto of this podcast is raising our children, growing ourselves. Today, you are not a bad parent. A fantastic episode with one of my and your favorite guests, Carla Naumburg. She's a returning guest. She's been on the podcast a few times, and her last appearance was in 2019. Since then, she has written another great book called You Are Not a Shitty Parent: How to Practice Self-Compassion and Give Yourself a Break, which is coming out on September 27th, if you're listening in real time. Besides being my friend, Carla is a clinical social worker and mother. She's the author of 5 nonfiction books, including her international bestseller, How to Stop Losing Your Shit with Your Kids. Carla's writing has appeared in a variety of online and print publications, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Huffington Post, Mindful Magazine, Slate, Psychology Today, Parents.com, and elsewhere. It was a real pleasure connecting with her again and discussing the role of self-compassion in parenting. As someone who works with parents, I can tell you that most parents have thoughts and questions like, I am damaging my kids. I am failing as a parent. Will my kids need therapy later in life? Am I a bad parent? I'm a bad parent. I didn't know this, but it turns out Carla herself has struggled with such a negative, self-critical inner voice, parenting her 2 daughters for many years. If you can relate, you are not alone. In fact, many parents feel that way. And there are real good reasons for that, which we talk about on the show. In addition, Carla shares tangible steps to help you reduce your anxiety, trust your instincts, move past the guilt, and become a calmer, more confident parent, which in the end benefits your child as much as you. Great parenting is not the same as perfect parenting. Great parenting starts with true self-compassion, the kind that means you don't judge yourself. Harnessing this self-compassion is the key to giving yourself a break and embracing your best qualities as a parent. Please enjoy this delightful and helpful conversation with Carla Naumburg. Carla, welcome to the podcast again.
Thank you, Anna. I'm so happy to be back.
I am excited to speak with you about your new book, keeping the theme of the same topic, the same style, your custom style, your traditional signature humor and wit.
And profanity.
And profanity. Yes, that's the word. I love it. It makes it relatable. No sugarcoating here.
That's the goal. I want parents to feel like they're just sitting down with a friend, having a cup of coffee and talking about parenting. I'm not here to lecture anybody or, get all hoity-toity. I just want to be real and connect with parents.
Sounds good. So before this interview today, I posted on Instagram a poll and I said, have you ever felt that you were not a good parent? And predominantly so far, it's been several hours. I posted early in the morning. It's afternoon now. It's 100% yes. Everybody said yes. There is no one no so far. So let's talk about why that is. Why do so many parents feel that they are failing, they're not good enough, or they are, as you say, shitty parents?
Yeah, I think so. In the book, I made up a diagnosis. I made up a syndrome. It's called shitty parent syndrome, and it's not real. But I wrote the book, so I'm allowed to just make stuff up and put it in there, right? Yay! So I think of shitty parent syndrome as the thought, belief, or perception that you are failing as a parent, that you are a terrible parent, when in fact you're not. And when I talk to people about that, the feedback I often get is, okay, but what if I am? What if I really am? What if somebody else is, right? And what I would say to them is, I actually don't believe there's such thing as a shitty parent. I believe there are parents who don't have the information or support or resources they need to parent the way they want to. And there are some parents that behave in pretty horrible ways, right? If you want to go to the extreme. But even with those parents, where there may be abuse or neglect involved, what I would say is these parents, rather than judging and shaming and labeling them, why don't we get curious about what's going on for them and offer support to them? Because really the goal is for them to be able to do better. That's what we all want. I mean, that's sort of my mission in this world, in this life, is to take care of my children, spend as much time as I can on my couch, and support other parents. Anyway, so the reason I think that so many parents these days feel like they're failing or doing a terrible job is I actually think there's three or four different reasons. One is that we're sort of genetically hardwired, evolutionarily speaking, to focus on the negative, because those way back when cave people ancestors who always saw the threat, thought everything was a threat, were constantly worried about what was going wrong and what could do better, were actually more likely to survive and pass on their genetic material than those ancestors who just sort of went through life feeling like everything was happy and good and didn't bother to notice that that squiggly thing on the ground was actually a snake and not a stick, right? And so there is some amount of kind of wiring, human wiring. In addition, for most of humanity, we survived by being in community, by staying connected to our village, essentially, that could protect us, help feed us, take care of us when we were sick. And one of the ways to stay in community is to sort of constantly be monitoring the folks around you, to see what they're doing and making sure you're not too far off base with whatever you're doing. But it used to be that we would compare ourselves, because that's really what this is. It's comparison for the sake of survival. We would compare ourselves to the folks who lived near us, who had the same resources, who had access to the same opportunities, who probably had pretty similar socioeconomic status to us. And now, thanks to social media and the internet and reality TV, we are comparing ourselves to people all over the planet who have totally different communities, environments, resources, opportunities, possibilities. And we're also comparing ourselves to unreality, to the impossible. I mean, we see these reality shows of parents with multiple kids, and I swear, if you watch these, Anna, these parents never lose their temper with their children. I don't understand, and so when I'm on social media, what I see is everybody else's best, right? Everybody else's highly filtered, curated moments. And I am comparing that to the awareness that I just lost my temper with my kids, or that I just totally fell apart, or that I've been crying all morning, or whatever it may be, right? And so these various factors, in addition, and there's one more that I want to talk about that's really important. So we've got sort of this evolutionary wiring to look out for the worst, to compare ourselves to others, and the way that sort of social media and reality TV and all that leave us comparing ourselves to folks that we have no connection to and often aren't in reality. But the fourth one is, I think, the rise of parenting experts. And I realize it's a little bit cheeky for me to bring this up, seeing as how I've written 4 parenting books now. But the books out there and the information and the podcast and all the advice, when it's not presented in an authentic way, right? Your podcast, Anna, when it's not presented in an authentic way or in a really honest way, it can leave parents believing that there is a right and best way to parent, one right and best way to parent. And that if parenting isn't easy for you, if it's not going well, it's because you're not doing it right. And that is a deeply problematic message, because the truth is, parenting is always hard for everyone. It's hard in different ways and at different times. And just because it's hard, that doesn't mean you're doing it wrong, right? It's just by nature, it's challenging. And what we need is the advice and support that so many podcasters and authors do offer that says, look, this is going to be tricky no matter what. Here's a few ideas that might make it a little bit easier. Give it a shot. This might help you, or this might just be a phase or a stage of life that you got to like muddle through because it's just going to stink, right? So I think that when parenting experts offer advice as though if you follow my 10-step plan, your kid will sleep through the night or eat their vegetables or ace algebra or whatever it is, that kind of does parents a disservice. And so we need to frame that same excellent advice as, here is one tool amongst many. Go take it, run with it, and I wish you the best of luck, right? Or whatever it is. But being really honest that parenting is always hard.
And unfortunately, sometimes I have to say, I also feel bad contributing to the noise of this parenting institution that we've created. Because, and if you can see, my advice is never 3 tips for getting your kids to eat their vegetables. I never would promote that kind of mentality or philosophy because I don't think that's fair or true. There are no quick fixes. But unfortunately, what I see, the Instagram accounts of those people who promote what to say to your kids before you get out of the door, 5 sentences that will change your morning routine, those easy, quick tips and tricks that people are looking for to get momentary relief, that those are the people who become big, unfortunately. But I don't think that's helping people. If you can't save your marriage in 6 steps, you can't, attend to a toddler tantrum and stop it or overcome your anxiety in 3 steps or 3 tips. I think I am so against that, and I would never promote that. And I think that's doing harm to the parents, because in the moment you read, it sounds great in your mind and you're like, I can do this. And maybe you do try those 3 tips or tricks, and maybe one day they work and you come for more. That becomes this a sort of an addiction because it sounds great. It gives you a sense of accomplishment in the moment, but there is no lasting change. You know what I mean? And I feel guilty for also being part of this parenting institution. And people sometimes, new clients call me and they say, oh, we don't need, we're doing great. We just need to take some parenting classes to learn a few tips or tricks like, there is no few tips or tricks. Like, this is deep work. Like, if you want a few tips or tricks, you came to the wrong person.
I totally agree with you, Anna. And I feel like the world of parenting advice is such a mixed bag because on the one hand, there is good advice out there. There is so much wisdom. There is so much support that parents really need, because often we're separated from our parents or grandparents. We're not living with our families of origin, which in many cases may be a good thing, right? For many people, but there is that sense of generational wisdom that's lost, that we need that village. And unfortunately, that village often exists online. And I think that the very nature of social media, which is how, unfortunately, so much of this wisdom information is transmitted through sound bites, I feel like folks are in some ways kind of forced to come up with these snappy clickbait headlines because it's what their editors want, or it's what gets the most clicks. And if you don't get the clicks, then you don't get anything. And so I am ambivalent about it too. And I'm trying to continue to hold compassion for all of us, because parenting in this world is so hard and so confusing. And I know I'm ambivalent about all of it. I've gotten such support and excellent wisdom and advice from so many parenting folks, including many of my colleagues and fellow authors and podcasters. And like you, I see these headlines that are like, 4 things that if you're doing this, you're a toxic parent, or 6 things to never say to your children. And it's scary and it's confusing for parents. It's a real minefield of a parenting landscape right now. And I feel like as we hopefully, fingers crossed, are actually emerging from COVID, this is a whole other transition. And we're just starting to understand the impact of this pandemic on all of us, on our children, on us, on our parenting, on our relationships. And the reason I wrote this book now about self-compassion is because I feel like there are so many moments when it's also damn confusing And we're going to make a choice that maybe is the right one, maybe we feel like is a good one. And sometimes it will be, and sometimes it won't be. But rather than beating ourselves up when things don't go well, I want to really teach parents how to hold themselves with compassion, because that's the thing that lets me get through the day. If I had to nail down one practice, one skill, one strategy that has changed my life as a parent, it's self-compassion.
And you were very critical before? Were you judgmental of yourself? When did you learn self-compassion? When did you discover it for yourself?
Oh, I am a critical, judgmental, snarky person by nature. That's like my default mode. Let's be very clear about that. And I have to intentionally work hard to overcome it. So yeah, my daughters were born 20 months apart. So I sort of ripped off the Band-Aid of parenting and was like launched off into the deep end. And it was intentional. It's what we wanted. And I very quickly and without realizing it developed a whopping case of postpartum anxiety, which even as a clinical social worker and a mental health practitioner, I didn't realize. I had no idea that's what was going on. I don't even think it's officially a diagnosis yet. You can have postpartum anxiety, but I don't think you can have postpartum depression. I don't think postpartum anxiety is actually a diagnosis yet. It should be, P.S. And what many people don't realize is that irritability is a classic symptom of anxiety, right? Anxiety is not just about worry. It's not just about not being able to sleep at night, whatever it is. And Anna, I can get really irritable, and it was really bad when my kids were little. And there are few things that will make you feel worse than screaming at a 2 and 3-year-old and watching them burst into tears, right? And when that 2 and 3-year-old are your children who you love more than anything, and you've done this, it's pretty hard not to feel bad about yourself, right? Especially if you have nothing else to turn to, if you have no other way to understand or interpret that moment. And so when I would lose my temper with my daughters, I just felt horrible, right? I was buried in shame and guilt and judgment and embarrassment. And I didn't know there was another way to think about it. And so as many of my readers and folks who have heard me talk before will know, that I turned to mindfulness. And honestly, I thought it was a load of crap. I thought it was a crock of whatever. I thought it was baloney, right? I didn't believe in any of it. But I had really, because I'm an academic by training, I had sort of been deep in the academic literature about parental emotional dysregulation, blah, blah, blah. And every single one of these articles ended with, we think these parents could probably benefit from some sort of mindfulness training. And I was like, that's baloney. But again, nothing else was working. And I sort of was so desperate to not be what I thought was a horrible parent that I signed up for a course in mindfulness-based stress reduction. And I very begrudgingly went, and I did all the breathing meditation. And then when they started talking about loving kindness and self-compassion, I almost threw up in my mouth. I was like, this is the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. There is no way that sending myself happy wishes is going to make me a better parent. I need like a checklist. I need that 3-point list, Anna. That's what I wanted, right? I wanted someone to tell me, here are the 5 ways you're going to stop yelling at your kids.
Because we are a very achievement, performance, goal, productivity, efficiency oriented culture, right? It's big because it makes you feel great. We can check things off of your list. There are people who do a ta-da list when they accomplish things. They make.
Wait, what? I want to do that. What is this? Tell me this. I want to do this. I love lists. A ta-da list?
You didn't know?
No,
So there is a to-do list, what you have to do, which is endless, right? But people created the ta-da list, which is, I finished those 5 things today, and it's ta-da, it's my ta-da list, to give you that confidence, that excitement.
I'm totally going to do this. I will tell you, sometimes, Anna, when I do something that's not on my list, I put it on my list just so I can check it off. Oh, I do. But look, you're right. You're right. And
because what will happen if we don't achieve, if we don't get ourselves busy? Because the opposite of that is we can't be present with what is. I think we're avoiding our pain. We're avoiding ourselves. It's uncomfortable. I'd rather accomplish and do things because then that gives me value than sit with my own self and I feel worthless. So how can I achieve and make things happen in the world, be a go-getter. And we bring that same mentality to parenting, and we want to use our kids as projects, and unfortunately, it just doesn't work like that.
Anna, I literally, if you could see my arms right now, I have goosebumps because everything you just said landed so deep, right? With my own personal experience, with like all of it. Yes, 100. Yes, all the things you just said are so true and so wise. And it's a challenge to not get focused on that stuff, especially when you are an anxious person by nature. There are a few things that are more soothing to one's anxiety than making checklists and having lists for everything and checking. Look at this. I'm going to hold up my little journal right here. Oh, I love my list.
Oh, wow. You are a real list maker.
Yeah. Oh, honey, don't get me started. Okay. So let's go back. So the thing that was, so I was there like cranky little seven-year-old being like, I don't want to practice self-compassion, but I didn't know what else to do. And I was like, oh, fine, I'll do it. And what I realized over time by practicing, and we'll talk in a minute about how to do this and what I do and what works. And there's amazing research and evidence about this. So this isn't just a bunch of like happy little mindfulness hippie people talking about this. There's actual research coming out of Kristen Neff and Christopher Germer and all sorts of people's research labs. And it's amazing. And once you practice it, you understand why. But what I first started to notice was just how horribly I was treating myself and how I would move through every day thinking, you are a terrible parent. You are screwing this up. Everybody else is getting this right. You're recreating old intergenerational patterns that are going to mess up your kids. They're going to grow up and they're not going to be physically healthy. And I would get into like details of all in my brain, right? My kids' ear infections were my fault. If I could do something better, it doesn't matter that like 8 generations of my family has always had ear infections. And clearly we have this lovely ear infection gene, which I don't know if that's a thing, but clearly it's a thing. It was somehow my fault. And if I wasn't playing enough music for the children, if I wasn't narrating my life, if I was narrating, right? And so it was this really vicious cycle, as you described earlier so beautifully, Anna, of I was anxious. I would seek out expert advice to make me feel better. And then I'd get really obsessive and feel horrible that I wasn't doing it well enough. And I was losing my temper with my kids all the time. So when I started to notice this horrible voice in my head that was constantly telling me I was doing it wrong, I was a crap parent, blah, blah, blah. And I started to try really hard to let it go, which is very difficult to do. And then I didn't know what to replace it with, because when you've been speaking the same language for 40 years and you don't have another language, there's nothing there.
You're right. I think it always should be replaced with something else. I think it's BS when they say just let that thing go, or a habit, right? I don't think humans work that way. Like, let's say if you want to quit coffee or something, you can't just eliminate and let that go. You need to replace that with something more productive, more efficient, better, kinder, and with an alternative. I think from my experience, that's how it works usually. Because if you eliminate, your brain is going to have this empty space, and it's not going to be okay with that.
Right. As anyone who's ever hung out with a bored toddler who's left, who has no structure for too long, it turns into a total mess. It becomes utter chaos. And my brain, is basically like an unruly toddler. So because my entry into self-compassion was through mindfulness, I used these phrases from the practice of loving kindness, but there's a million different ways to get into this. But basically, every time I started to think of myself as a terrible mother, I would just say, may I be happy, may I be healthy, may I be safe, may I live with ease. And when I first started saying those phrases, I was like, wah, 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 wah. It was not meaningful to me. I didn't believe it, but I didn't know what else to say. I didn't know what else to think. I was left with this really, as you pointed out, unhelpful void. And over time, what I came to really experience was, and as I got deeper into self-compassion and practicing more, was that when I treat myself with compassion, with kindness, with understanding and forgiveness and grace, and I got to tell you, since COVID started, I have been on a serious romance novel kick. All I want to do is read romance novels all day. So I'm going to quit my job and move to the beach and read romance novels. That's my plan. But there's one romance novel by Abby Jimenez, who's one of my favorite writers. And in it, one of the characters says to another character, grace costs you nothing. And I'd never heard that before. And it like stuck me right in like my deep place. I was like, yes, being kind and giving someone forgiveness and treating them with grace, it costs you nothing. And if we can do it for other people, why the hell can't we do it for ourselves? So that's my little like that's romance novel wisdom.
That is the thing. Why can't we give it to ourselves? Because we feel like we don't deserve it.
Yeah, and because of all the reasons I've talked about before.
We don't know how to receive it. We don't know what it feels like. Other people haven't given it to us.
I think all of those reasons, and I also think that self-compassion is literally a language that none of us grew up speaking because our parents weren't taught it and our grandparents weren't taught it, and it's not Western culture. Western culture is pull yourself up by your bootstraps, get your life in gear, work harder. You know, if you don't sort of berate yourself in some way, how are you going to change? And the truth is that compassion is a hugely powerful change agent. And, you know, so let's look at this. Okay, let's say I have a terrible parenting moment. Let's say I get into it with my teenage daughter and she says things and I say things and we both feel like crap and we know we love each other, but we've had a bad moment. So there are two options here. I can go off and think, ugh, I'm a crap parent. My daughter's going to have all these struggles and challenges in life because I'm not interacting with her properly. And then I just feel stuck and lost and like, where do I go from there? There's nothing. I've just sort of put myself in a hole of crappy parenthood and there's nowhere to go. But if I go and I say to myself, wow, parenting a daughter can be really hard sometimes. It's hard for everyone. It's okay that I'm not perfect at it. That doesn't make me a bad mother. And then if I can get curious, what happened in that moment? What was going on for both of us? What's going on for me? Am I exhausted because I didn't sleep well last night? Am I hungry because I forgot lunch today? Is my daughter in a bad space because she's starting a new school year and she's stressed and anxious? Or is she annoyed because she's confused about masking and COVID and all these details and what are the rules and what are the strategies? Is she hungry? Are we both getting our periods? I don't know. Like, what the hell's going on? I don't know. And sometimes we don't know the answer.
But somehow we make it about us, as if we failed, as if this is something we have control over. There is so many things, like you said, so many variables. But I think when we make things about ourselves, that's a sign of trauma, right? That part of the brain that always makes things about yourself and very personal, even though things are neutral happening in another dimension or in the real world. I think that's a clear sign of trauma when a person makes everything about themselves.
Well, I don't know. I need to think about that more. That's an interesting point. I think what I'm just saying is
it's this self-referential aspect of life.
Well, that's just human nature. We all do that all the time, don't you think?
Not to an excessive degree. I think we all do that, but if it's an excessive degree, I had a podcast listener, for example, who said to me, when you said that in a podcast, in an interview, I say all sorts of things. She's like, were you talking about me? I'm like, no, like, I don't know your life. So people can take even those things personally. So that's a clear sign. That's what I'm talking about. Those extreme self-referential self. It's about me. Somebody looked at you. Somebody said something. Your husband said something. It's all about you. And we bring that into our parenting and we feel like it's like we're lost and confused, but it's never about us. It's seldom about us, in fact, right?
Well, I think what I was going for is in that moment, I think what I was trying to talk about was the difference between judgment and curiosity. So if we are judging ourselves to be terrible parents, to have made a horrible mistake, to whatever, screwing up our kids, that's a dead end street right there. But if we can get curious about that moment, about either our children's needs or our own needs, sometimes we might land on something really important. And the best example I have for this is when my daughter was quite young, 4 or 5, we took her and her sister down to the local street fair. And we had a great day and we bought them ices and we paid $5 so they could throw a ring on a bottle and win a 30-cent toy. And we did all the things. We played in the bouncy houses. We listened to the live music. It was a really fun day. And then out of the blue, my daughter just epically falls apart, has this massive meltdown. She asked for something overpriced and really stupid, and I said we couldn't get it, and she just lost it. And I flipped out, and I was like, I am raising a spoiled brat of a child. I'm a terrible parent. She's a terrible kid. This is all horrible. And my spiraling brain just like exploded with all sorts of contempt for me and for my daughter. And then somehow, I don't know how, I paused for a moment. I don't know where this came from. And I kind of thought about things and I thought, oh crap, we were having so much fun. I forgot to give her lunch. And a child cannot survive on a snow cone alone, right? And she was like 4 years old and she didn't have the self-awareness yet to be able to tell me she was hungry. And she is my daughter and I am my grandmother's granddaughter. And we come from a long line of people who get very hangry when they are hungry. And so I got her some food. And she went back to being the flexible, lovely, responsive kid that she so often is. And so I think in that moment, judgment got me nowhere. There was no off-ramp from that really terrible road I was heading down. It was just like, well, today sucks and my kid sucks and I suck and everything sucks. But when I could get curious, there was actually a pretty simple solution. And for sure, not every moment has simple solutions. Sometimes the underlying issues are complicated and scary, and they have to do with mental illness or developmental issues or deeper relational issues or really hard academic struggles or whatever it is. But if we don't take the moment to get curious, which is a core practice of self-compassion, we're never going to know.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah. But it's so second nature for many people to go down that downward spiral, right? Right away.
Oh, 100%. And that's why this is a practice, right? And why practice, when a lot of people hear the word practice, they think a thing you do. And that's not what I mean. What I mean by practice is a thing you are terrible at when you first start, and then you keep doing it until you get better, right? So when we send our kids to soccer practice for the first time, we don't actually expect them to be any good, but it's not like we put them out on the field once, and if they're not masters, we pull them off the field and say, well, you suck. We keep sending them back on the field. And so in the book, I go through some of the core practices of self-compassion. And my guess is if you, the listener, are anything like me and most of the people I know, the first time you practice, it's not really going to work, whatever that means. It's not going to feel good. It's going to feel weird and unnatural. And you're going to be like, who is this crazy lady with the book that wants me to do all this weird stuff? But stick with it, right? And eventually the goal is to practice when you're not stressed and freaking out and having a hard time, so that then when those moments come where you find yourself sort of mired in judgment and contempt and all that shitty parent syndrome, then you'll be able to do that thing that you've been practicing all along.
Yeah. You don't want to practice only in the emergency moments because that's not going to be useful. It's not going to work anyways. It never works. Yeah. You don't get up on the day of the Olympics and say, you know what, I'm going to win this race. You practice for years for this. And you may not even succeed or win the race during the Olympics. Yeah. So the practice comes before, but like in our go, do, 3 steps, 5 steps, people give up easily, unfortunately. How can we make them stick with it? Is there a practice to help them to stick with the practice?
There is. And at the risk of sounding obnoxious, that practice is also self-compassion. Because think about it. Here's the analogy that I've used before, tends to land with listeners, especially female listeners. Let's say you've started your new diet, right? And then 2 or 3 days in, you eat an Oreo. And an Oreo is not on your diet, unless you have some awesome diet I haven't heard about, in which case, please email it to me immediately. So if you say to yourself, I suck, I'm a failure, I will never, lose this weight or whatever I'm trying to do, and this is a nightmare, and I'm just the worst, we all know what happens next. You're going to eat the whole stinking sleeve of Oreos. Of course you are.
To placate that very negative, shame-induced thought.
And like, what's the point? You suck, so why even keep trying?
Yeah.
But if you can say to yourself, wow, okay, I ate an Oreo and that's all right. Like, one Oreo is not going to ruin my diet, and dieting is hard for everyone. And we know that because the data about dieting isn't great anyways. And people struggle a lot, and you don't have to be perfect to do a good job. It was just a little misstep. I'm still like really good at taking care of my body. Chances are you're going to put those Oreos away. And the same is true for when you fall off the wagon of compassion. Okay, so I just totally beat myself up about this parenting moment. Well, you can either be like, yeah, I suck and I'll suck forever. Or my chosen path would be to say something to yourself like, gosh, so much of parenting is really hard. It's brutal. I am having a really hard time, but I know I'm not alone. I know other parents struggle too. What do I need right now? Do I need to call a good friend who's going to speak this language of compassion to me because I can't find the words right now? Do I need to go read a book or listening to a song or put on a TV show with my kid that feels comforting and soothing and makes me laugh? Do I need to, ask family members or my parenting partner or someone for help with my kids because I need a couple of hours off, right? How can you remind yourself that you are not alone? How can you connect to the people that love and support you? And how can you hold your perspective in balance so you remember that you don't have to be a perfect parent to be a good one?
Yeah. So how to go about practicing? I mean, you're already mentioning some statements and reframes and things of this nature. How do you practice these days? Like what it's like for you, and or maybe what are the benefits for you? Is your inner voice your inner coach now? Is it silent? Can you silence it when it roars into this judgmental? What are the benefits for you?
So the benefits that I've experienced are similar to the benefits you find in the research, which is that I tend to be less anxious. I mean, look, my anxiety requires a lot of, I work hard on it from a number of levels. I'm obsessive about getting enough sleep. I take medication for it. I do all sorts of things, but self-compassion has been a game-changing experience. And I'll tell you why. It's a lot less anxiety provoking when you know that some jerk isn't going to berate you every single time you screw up. And when that jerk happens to live in your own brain, that's pretty stressful, right? If you had to go to a job every day and know that your boss was going to follow you around and point out everything you did wrong, that's terribly anxiety provoking. So we know that self-compassion leads to lower levels of anxiety and depression, better sleep, increased energy, because when you're not spending all your time berating yourself, right? But I would say that in terms of my parenting, I tend to be calmer because, again, it's when I am not filled with self-contempt and shame, I'm not as wound up. I'm not as tense. I'm not as stressed. Parenting feels a little easier. I'm calmer. I'm more creative. Again, because when your brain isn't overwhelmed by all these judgmental, negative, sort of self-damning thoughts, there's a lot more room to think creatively about situations. So you hear about parents who come up with these really unique solutions to problems, like the mom whose kids were fighting in the car. So she just put up one of those science poster dividers between the car seats and she put like stickers or something on them. That's brilliant, right? And those kind of creative solutions are so specific to each family that it's really hard to read about those in a list and know that they're going to work for your family. But again, when you have the more brain space, you can think of these creative opportunities. And I feel more confident in my parenting because I'm not constantly berating myself again. And I will tell you, Anna, I can't think of the last time I thought of myself as a bad parent or a shitty mother. I just don't have those thoughts anymore. I am a good mother. Am I a perfect mother? Absolutely not. Do I miss the mark on a regular basis? Yeah. Oh, I sure do. But I show up for my kids and I keep working at it and I keep trying and I keep finding new ways to connect. And when I do something wrong, I apologize. And it has taken me years to get there, right? This is literally years of practice, but it was also a lot of finding my way through the weeds. And one of the things I'm hoping by writing this book is that other parents, it won't take them years. It will still be practice, to be sure. This is not an overnight shift. And so the way I talk about the practices in the book are, I lay out three main practices that I see as sort of fundamental to self-compassion. The first one is connection. And by connection, there are sort of three different places that I find really useful for connecting. One is connecting to people your support system, the people in your life who love and support you and will speak this language of self-compassion to you. And if you find that the parents you're hanging out with leave you feeling confused or doubtful or ashamed or insecure, those aren't your people. And I'm not saying they're bad people. I'm just saying they're not the right ones for you. So finding your people that you can connect to. The other thing that's important to connect to is what researchers call common humanity, which just means reminding yourself in general that you're not alone, that parenting is hard for everyone. That's really important. And then the last one is connecting to the present moment, which is this mindfulness piece that's so important when our brain gets swirling about all the ways we're screwing up. Just coming back to the present moment and reminding yourself, like, what is actually happening? What can I see and touch and hear and taste and feel, as opposed to what's all the craziness swirling around in my brain? So connection is the first practice.
Can I say something? It's so beautiful. Keep your thought. When I first created this podcast, you have to create an outro, how you want to end the show.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I created one. And at the moment, I mean, I don't know, it came up to me. It wasn't like I gave like deep thought or like suffered days. And I keep it to this day, because the more I said it, the more I realized how true and powerful it was. And it's this. Every podcast episode for 7 years, that's how I ended. Connect to the present moment, to yourself and your children. I am Anna Sewell. Thank you for listening.
Oh, I love it.
And now that you're mentioning this, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so interesting.
It's powerful.
It is powerful. Yeah.
Anna, you have so much wisdom. I love it.
And I don't know where it came from. But now I'm like, wow, like I was on this right path. I meant to do this.
It's amazing. I love it. Shall I keep going about the practices?
Yes,
useful?
Okay. Please, yes.
So the first one is connection. The second one, which we've talked about, is curiosity, which I see as the antidote to judgment. And getting curious about something, whether it's your own experience or your child's experience, is a deeply compassionate thing to do, because it means you're not judging them, because you're actually interested in their experience and in your own experience. So and the trick to curiosity is that when you come up with a solution, not a solution, when you come up with an answer about what you need, especially, pay attention to it. And that's something that we parents, and especially mothers, I'm going to say, blow off all so often. Oh, I could really use a good night's sleep, but that'll happen when I'm dead. Oh, I could really use some time with friends. Oh, that'll happen when the kids move out of the house. Please stop doing that, right? If you need something, do your best to get it for yourself. And if you can't get it for yourself because you don't have the resources or support, then please have extra compassion for yourself, because your basic needs aren't being met. And it's really hard to function well when your basic needs aren't being met, right? So we've got connection, we've got curiosity. And then the third one is treating yourself with kindness. And there's a number of different practices in the book for how to be kind to yourself, which is really sounds so basic, but so many of us have just forgotten how to do it. And the biggest one is kind self-talk. Again, when you notice that your inner jerk or gremlin or whatever you want to call him is berating you, can you kind of let that go and set it aside? He'll probably come back, and that's okay. You let him go and set it aside again. But can you let that go and find some way to talk to yourself with kindness? And again, this is like learning a new language. It can feel weird. It can feel hard to find the right words. It can feel like really inauthentic and strange and not you. That's okay. Stick with it. Just like learning a new language, you got to practice. Stick with it, and eventually you'll get fluent in it. And I give a bunch of examples in the book of ways to speak to yourself and treat yourself with kindness. But those are really the three core practices of self-compassion. It's about connection, curiosity, and kindness.
I'm curious about the curiosity.
I love that. That's so
yeah. Can you, I'm sure you did a lot of research and reading. What are some ways we can deepen that skill of becoming curious?
Oh my gosh, that's such a good question. It's a really important question, because I think often we think curiosity is something that's for kids and scientists. Like, what is this? We don't have time for this in our daily lives. And so I think ways that we can become curious. Curiosity is kind of like noticing, but taking it to the next level, to the deepening level. And so some of the things that I think can be really helpful for curiosity: one, spend time with people who are curious about you. And this is not easy to find, but when you find a friend or a family member who actually says, what's going on with you, which none of us do as often as we should for each other, right? But when you find those people, be willing to open up a little bit, right? Practice, because when you can actually open up and answer them and engage in that conversation, in appropriate ways, you don't want to be that person that, like, a friend at the playground says, "How are you?" And all of a sudden you're spilling everything in your life. Like, that's not really it. But when those moments come that it's the right person in the right time, rather than just saying, I'm fine, everything's fine, can you go a little deeper with them? And I give examples of this in the book. The other way to be curious for many people is either through journaling or meditation. If you have time to journal about your experience and ask yourself some questions, and I give some ideas in the book, and really write about that. And again, you may be listening to this, dear listener, and saying, I don't have time for that. And the truth is, you probably do. I'm not saying you have to write 30 pages a day, but could you spend 5 minutes doing a guided meditation about curiosity or spending time with your journal? And then the last one is hang out with people who are professionally curious, by which I mean therapists. Now, as I'm saying this, I'm acutely aware that getting a mental health treater in the United States is probably harder than it's ever been. On the one hand, there are many online treaters, which I, as an old school therapist, am honestly pretty skeptical about. But I think that, if you can, I don't think they're schemers or not honest or anything like that. I just have never done therapy via Zoom. And so I think if it works for you, that's great, because they are reputable. It's just a different experience.
It works. I've done therapy for myself because I had issues with anxiety when my father passed away of COVID in 2020, 21 or 20. I forgot, 20. So I had tremendous anxiety panic attacks like I've never had before in my life. And I just couldn't anymore. My own tools were not enough, right? I reached out for a therapy and I said, I want to in person. And obviously not many people were offering in person at that time. And it was via, an online platform. And I have to say it did work. These days I work like that too. It does work, but there's something missing from it. It's different. But it does work when you're desperate, when you need it. It does work. It's
definitely, you know what, Anna, this is such a good point. It's better than the alternative for many people, which is nothing.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. And there is a free service. I believe I'll double check before I say this now, but I'll double check and post it in the show notes. There is a website, I believe it's called 7cups.com. that offers a variety of mental health free support for those people who cannot afford. I'll double check that and put it in the show notes. I had shared that in my private Facebook group once before, and I know it's a reliable source.
That's amazing. So if you look,
there are things available. Yeah.
There are services. If you have access to a therapist, a clergy member, a counselor, somebody like this who can get curious with you. And when I say professionally curious, I mean, that is literally our job as mental health treaters, to be curious about your experience. That's another way to have someone guide you through and support you through the practice of being curious is very powerful. And that's another way to deepen that practice.
It is powerful. Like, as a person who does this, I just happened to working with someone yesterday, and I pushed her and I challenged her and she's like, wow, I never thought about that way. Or they generate insight because all we do is ask questions, right? We deepen that curiosity, and it's a fantastic way of deepening that practice of curiosity. I like that. I never thought of that as a way of strengthening that skill of curiosity, but that's a good suggestion. Before I ask you other questions, I want to know, you became compassionate towards yourself in your parenting. Is it transferable to other areas of your life? Have you noticed that?
Oh my gosh. Absolutely. I will say that I am more compassionate towards my daughters than I have ever been. I am not as compassionate yet as I would like to be. So it's a lifelong journey, right? It's a lifelong practice. But what I have found is I am so much less judgmental of other parents. And I used to be so judgmental and snarky and kind of bitchy about other parents. And I can't believe they did that. And how could they do this? And how did they think that was going to end up? And that was 100% drawing from my own insecurity, my anxiety, my judgment of myself. And now I may not agree with choices other parents make, and that's okay. That doesn't mean they're wrong and I'm right. It just means we're parenting different ways because we're different people with different children, and we should be parenting different ways, right? And I find that I just naturally am so much less judgmental of other parents, and I have so much more compassion for all of us. And I find that when I'm in situations where previously I might have judged another parent, now I find myself saying, oh my gosh, parenting is so hard. And I can only imagine all of the situations that might be going on behind the scenes. You know, you see a kid having a meltdown in a grocery store, you see something happening out in public and it's a mess. And I used to be like, well, that's a terrible parent years and years ago because I thought I was a terrible parent. It was totally me. You know, we call this projection, right? It was 100% me projecting onto these other parents. And now that I am not filled with that sort of contempt, it doesn't come out. And so I look at another parent in a horrible situation with a kid, and all I can think is, there must be so much going on behind the scenes for that, as there is for all of us. And I wish there was some way I could help them. I wish they had more support. I wish there was something I could do rather than thinking that they're a bad parent.
Yeah, and that's that curiosity right there that that you can use and say, what's going on for that person? There's always something going on that we're not aware. When you were talking about the inner voice and this inner critic that shows up, I was just reminded of the work of Dick Schwartz, the IFS. I think it would be so useful to say, oh, a part of me, not I'm a bad parent, right? Because overall, none of us are bad parents. Okay, we make mistakes, we yell, we do certain things, but it shouldn't affect the total score of of our parenting, but it does. So I think just using this IFS terminology and saying a part of me messed up today, a part of me, that language, I think I see it as a helpful tool. Are you familiar with IFS?
I know a little bit about it. I haven't been trained in it, and I'm certainly not trained well enough to speak to it, but I think that would be brilliant. I think also remembering that when you're thinking these words, I'm a terrible parent, it's just a thought, right? It's not reality. I can think I'm president of the United States. I can think I'm a happy little unicorn, though that doesn't make it true. And so another way to sort of get that distance, just like you can say a part of me, you could also say, I'm having the thought that I'm a terrible parent. It's just a thought. I could also have the thought that I'm the greatest parent in the universe. I can think whatever I want, right? Doesn't make it true. And so when you can put those words in front of it, I am having the thought that also gives you a little more space and distance from whatever's going on in your mind. And it gives you the ability to no longer kind of take the bait and assume that it's all true. Because man, we fall for our own thoughts a lot.
Oh my gosh. We just had a support call yesterday, and that was the topic of our call. I just came back from Armenia, and before going to Armenia, I had so many worrisome, anxious, negative thoughts. Well, what's going to go wrong, right? And honestly, the trip was the opposite. And what I learned from it was, boy, things in our head are so much worse than the reality. Can we just get a distance from our thoughts, come out of our mind, our brain, and just see our thoughts as our thoughts? And that is not the true experience, right?
Yeah, 100%. And that's totally a mindfulness practice. And again, it's something we have to practice. And just, I was talking to a friend, we were talking about mindfulness, and she was having some pretty unhelpful thoughts related to anxiety, related to parenting. And she said, but Carla, I just keep letting them go and then they keep coming back. And I was like, yeah, yep. Because when you've been having these thoughts, well, my oldest daughter is going to be 14 next month. So when you keep having these thoughts for 14 years, it's going to take a long time to sort of disconnect those neural networks. The way I think about it, though, is you have two options. You can just drown in these terrible thoughts, or you can keep coming up for air over and over and over again. And I don't know about you, but I'd rather keep coming up for air.
I think those thoughts, because they're so, I don't know, are hardwired part of our programming, whatever language you want to use, they were such default for us for many years. Even if you learn a new language, they're still going to be there, dormant, right? Even if you practice the new language, that old programming is still going to be there. And I think this is my thinking. I want to hear your thoughts. We're never going to get rid of that soundtrack, that theme music, those thoughts that are part of our biology somehow, because they're so ingrained. They're going to be silenced. They're going to be there, and they're sometimes going to poke their head and come, and we're going to learn a new language. I think that's the aim. The aim is never to get rid of them, delete them, prune them out. I don't think that's even biologically possible.
It may not be, but I will tell you, you can, like, let's say you grow up speaking a certain language and then you learn another language and you speak that new language for years and years. At some point, it is possible that your native language will pop back through. Those crappy parent thoughts will pop back through. But I think you can get to the point where they're so infrequent that it's surprising and you will notice them. So the first time I thought of myself as a good parent, it was so surprising that I noticed it. I was like, whoa, I just had that thought. And that is like, what the hell just happened there? And that was so many years ago.
What happened that you had that thought? Like,
oh my God, I think
happen?
I wrote about this story in the previous book, but it was a Friday. I can tell you in like such detail because the moment was so ingrained in my brain. I was at the counter chopping up a red pepper, and the girls were they were like 5 and 6 years old. So how sad is this, Anna, that I went through 6 years of parenting without thinking I was a good mother, working my butt off at the hardest, most important job of my life, never feeling like I was doing well. But I had been practicing my mindfulness, blah, 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 my loving kindness. And I'm standing there at the counter. It's a Friday night. I'm chopping up a pepper. The girls are somehow playing nicely. They were like getting along really well in that moment. And I had Willie Nelson playing because I love Willie Nelson. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, this thought pops into my head. I'm a good mother. And it was so shocking that I dropped the knife and it almost hit my foot. And I kind of like squeaked in this weird squeaky way that the kids looked at me. And all I could think was, A, I want to have that thought a lot more often. And B, I felt this overwhelming sadness for myself. Why hadn't I thought that before? I just look back at that like person. And now I think that if I suddenly thought of myself as a shitty mother now, I would be like, whoa, what's going on? Like, where did that come from? That's not the language I speak anymore. And I will tell you, Anna, there's a little part inside of me that's like, it's not fair to other parents for me to go on this podcast and say, I think I'm a good mother, because that's going to make other parents feel bad if they don't think they're good parents. That's one part of my brain, Anna, that's saying that. And the other part of my brain is saying, no, we need to open up a conversation and a space where mothers, deeply imperfect mothers, and I will say fathers too, but I'm not as tuned into the father conversation. So I don't know what's happening with dads as much, but let's just say parents, where parents can show up and connect with other parents without having to throw themselves under the bus, where parents can show up and connect with other parents and say, you know what, I'm a pretty good parent. Like, I get it right more often than I get it wrong. I keep showing up even when it's hard. And I think there's not a lot of room in the parenting conversation for that kind of talk right now. And so I am trying to be brave and share this experience with other parents and say, I think I'm a good mother. I think you're a good parent too. None of us are perfect. Let's create a space where we can talk in that way.
I can say so many things. That sadness. First, I want to go to that vivid story. I felt every moment of that. It's such the red pepper, the knife, the song. You described it so well. It's an important image, and that sadness that came with that. I feel so sad. Also learning that, wow, you were able to be compassionate towards yourself. Hopefully, that those years I didn't know what I know, and now, this is how it is. There is that part. Yesterday, I had a client who, they have an autistic kid. They didn't get a diagnosis until he was in like 3rd grade. And even though they were prompted by the kindergarten to do so. And she said, I feel so bad as a bad parent that all those years I missed this opportunity. We could have done so much for our kid. And I feel this way and there's nothing I can do, right? But I think it's always good to start from where you are. And then self-compassion is useful here, right? To be compassionate towards that part of you, who you were before you discovered self-compassion. I think that that's important. Change only comes, true change, when we accept ourselves fully and all parts of ourselves.
Oh, and just to be clear, that is still a journey for me, right? I don't even know what it means to accept myself fully. But what I would say to that mother is, oh, mama, we've all been there. You know, the dentist the other day found some cavities in my daughter's mouth and said it's because she was on too many antibiotics when she was a kid for all these chronic ear infections. I was beating myself up because, like, I never went to the doctor looking for antibiotics, but I went to the doctor and my kid's ear was on fire and she was like, this is what you need. And then I'm like, I should have known that antibiotics cause cavities. Anna, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a dentist. How should I know that, right? We are all going to make choices in parenting that are not going to be ideal for our kids. Every single one of us. And all we can do is show up for ourselves with so much kindness and forgiveness, because that is the reality of parenting. We can't change that any more than we can change gravity. It's not going to happen. And hopefully we balance it out with the love and connection and attention and the moments when we get it right. But we are all going to make choices. I have made choices. You have made choices, every single one of us, that were not in our kids' best interest. And we did the best we could. And I think this especially happened during COVID, when we were all struggling with, do I send my kid to school? Do I keep them home? Do I let them do this activity? Do I not? Do I make them wear a mask? Do I blah, 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 blah? And what I say to parents is, look, in that moment, your only options were bad and worse. And at the moment when you chose, you had no idea which one was bad and which one was worse. And all we can do is forgive ourselves for that. All we can do is talk to ourselves the way our best friend, our closest aunt, the person who loves us most in the world would talk to us. And to that mom, I would say, yeah, mama, it's so hard. It's so painful. Hang in there. You're doing a great job. But oof, this parenting stuff, Anna, it is not for the faint of heart. I'll tell you that.
No, for sure. But also we have this responsibility for modeling it for our kids, right? I don't want my kid to be self-critical and self-judgmental. Do you? You have two beautiful children, 2 girls. Do you want them to?
Oh my gosh.
To learn
no.
that lesson from you? No.
We live in a culture that, thanks to advertising and social media and blah, 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 they are swimming in a world of judgment and blame and shame and all the things. And I'm trying so hard to counteract that. And I feel like a little fish swimming against the tide, but I'm not going to give up. And the other day I did something, I don't know, I made some mistake. I screwed something up, whatever. It was a day that ends in Y, so it happened. And my daughter looks at me and she goes, it's okay, mommy. We all make mistakes. And I almost started crying, because sometimes I'm a little emotionally unhinged, but I almost started crying because I was like, yes, like I want self-compassion and compassion to be your native language, child. And that's no guarantee that, you know, my kid has this nailed or that I've nailed it, but she is on this journey because she has heard me say so many times over the years, we all make mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes. Like, where do we go from here? What's next? And so I try to practice compassion out loud in front of my kids whenever I can, because I want them to hear it, because I want them to have that voice in their head as much as any other voice. And so I say out loud, wow, today's a hard day. Parenting is hard. Oof, like, this is a hard world to live in right now. What do we need, guys? What do we need to get through the rest of this day? How can we, you know, and I'll show up for them and I'll say, I'm having a rough day, girls. Like, I need your support. I need you to help me today. Or if they're having a rough day, I'll say, I think you're having a rough day. What do you need in this moment? Do you need me to listen? Do you need me to offer advice? And then if they say listen, here's the trick, Anna. If they say listen, I have to zip my trap and listen. And I may have advice for them, but if they don't want it, it's hard, but I don't give it.
Oh, so it's so funny. My daughter yesterday says, Mom, let's go for a walk in the evening. I said, okay. She's like, I want to share something with you. Can you just listen, but also say some things? Give me feedback. I said, yeah, I will. She's like, because I talked about this with dad and he was just listening. I said, so what's wrong with that? Dad was listening. He's like, no, I want somebody to say something back to me. I said, okay, no worries. I will listen to you. So, like ask questions, generate insights so that you're not just passively. She's like, otherwise I feel like I'm talking to myself in a room or to a wall. I said, I'm like, it's so interesting that she made that distinction between listening and listening,
It's brilliant. And, sometimes my girls will come to me and say, what do I do? Like they just don't know because they're 12 and 13. How are they supposed to know all the things, right? And so when they come and they say, what do I do? Then I do try to give them advice. But I think about modeling compassion for my children all the time because I don't want them to grow up with the voice in their head that I had in mind for so many years.
Yeah, I'm so dying to know what the voice in my kid's head is. Like, isn't it curious? Like, I don't know. I'm always curious. But I think like my kid is a lot confident and better off than I was at her age or at any age in my life. But I love what you said about modeling it out loud. Compassion, right? It's important. Also, how we talk about mistakes or how we it's important to talk about mistakes. Let's talk about this a little bit. Also, how you treat the mistake, right? How you show up when something, not only in your life, but when your kid made a mistake or somebody dropped something, something spilled. I don't know. It could be a regular thing. Somebody lost something. What is your reaction? Because kids are watching and internalizing all of that, right? You can say, oh, it's okay. We all make mistakes. But do you also react as like, oh my gosh, what happened? Like, if something doesn't go quote unquote right, I think it starts with that, how we treat mistakes and failures, how we talk about them, how we practice self-compassion, and how we show up in those moments when my kid didn't get the best grade, didn't make the team. Like my daughter didn't make a team this year. Like she wanted to play this specific sport and, did try out and didn't make the team. But what is my language about? I don't want to frame it as failure. No, I don't want to feel that as a failure that she didn't make it. Okay, it's a disaster. These are all important lessons. And we're not going to teach them in one day. First, we have to learn it ourselves, right? Because what did our parents teach us? What did we learn about mistakes? It's an important aspect.
It's hugely important. And look, I'm a child of the 80s. And so what I learned growing up in the 80s in the United States was that if you're not good at something the instant you start or try it, you might as well give up. And failures suck. And if you fail, you suck, basically. We were like the fixed mindset generation. And now our kids are learning about growth mindset, which is the thing that nobody ever talked to me about, right? This idea that it's not about the end result, but it's about working hard and showing up and persevering and resilience and all these things that, again, my inner 80s child is like, that's a bunch of baloney. But thankfully, I am not dictated by that child. And so my kids are at a school, which I'm very grateful for, that has talked a lot about growth mindset. And they come home talking about that. And I've been learning about it. And so I do talk to my kids about working hard and hard work. But one of the things I also do is I try to share and normalize my failures with them. So when I try to sell a book to a publisher and the publisher doesn't want it, I tell them that. And when I have a fiction book that I've been trying to sell for years and nobody wants to buy it, they know.
Hold on a minute. Who doesn't want a book by Carla Naumburg?
People. Yeah. What the
We should talk to them.
No, but I want them to see that part of being a writer is getting rejected a lot. That's the deal, right? And so when I come up with book ideas and I write the book and I send it out, oh man, Anna, it would be so tempting to just like delete that email rejection and never tell anyone about it. Who wants to talk about that? But I talk to my daughters about it because I want them to see that this is part of life, that you can be successful and also fail, right? And that sometimes
in fact, there is no succeeding without failing. Right? You can never succeed without failing.
I think so, but I don't like that. I do not like that. I don't want to ever fail. That's annoying. I don't like failure. But I'm trying to be a grown up about this here. So I talk to my daughters about it, right? And sometimes things won't go their way and they'll fail at something. And I say, look, this is a skill you need in life. So we're going to keep practicing at it. And sometimes I'll say, this is a thing you don't really enjoy. You're not very good at. You didn't do well at it. And it's going to take a lot of work to get a whole lot better. Do you really care? And sometimes they'll say yes. And sometimes they'll say no. And if they say no, I say, great, let's ditch it. I don't think we have to have like a perfect growth mindset about everything. We don't have to persevere and be resilient in everything, but we need to persevere and be resilient in enough things. And so I try to, if my daughters play a sport for a season and they're terrible at it and they don't enjoy it, I'm not going to make them play that sport again next season, but I will encourage them to try something new. And I do work hard to share my successes and failures with them so that they see that both are part of the deal.
Yeah, I agree. Well, this is so great. I love our conversation, our time together as always. Your energy is contagious, your passion, your knowledge, your wisdom, your humor. I love all of it and your stories. I wish you so much success with this book. I know it will succeed. I have no doubt. It was a true pleasure connecting with you. I don't know if the last time we spoke, we were on video. I don't remember that somehow, but I don't
know, but I love being on video.
Yes,
I love seeing your face.
I love seeing you, seeing all your facial expressions and
my facial expressions.
And then thank you for the work that you're doing and the message that you're spreading. Hopefully, one parent at a time.
And I feel the same way. Thank you for everything you do for parents through your practice and your podcast. And I just have to make my publisher happy and put in one more plug for the book. It's called You Are Not a Shitty Parent, and it publishes on September 27th, 2022. And you can find all the information you need on my website, which is carlanaumburg.com.
We will have all the links in the show notes and all your previous episodes in the show notes so people can go back and listen to those as well. And your social media, I don't know where you're active, but thank you again. This was a delight.
I hang out on Instagram and Facebook far more than I should. And Anna, it's lovely to talk to you. Thank you.
That concludes today's conversation, my dear listener, and I hope you enjoyed it. What's your biggest takeaway? Did you find it useful? What's one thing that you can apply to your life, to your parenting today? Do you practice self-compassion? Do you have self-judgment? Do you think you are a bad parent? I would love to hear from you. Get in touch. Send me a note to the email info@authenticparenting.com. Call the number 732-763-2576 and leave a voicemail. And for you international listeners, there is a free tool on the contact page of my website. Go to authenticparenting.com/contact and leave a message. If you enjoyed the podcast, you can help us out by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or on whatever platform that you listen to. Reviews and ratings are very helpful. Also, consider becoming a patron on patreon.com. With a small monthly contribution, you can support your favorite show and join the existing 21 patrons who together contribute $121 towards our monthly goal of $500. You can learn more and choose a level of support at patreon.com/authentic parenting. You can find the show and follow it wherever podcasts are played. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and elsewhere. And I hope you'll join us next week for yet another great conversation. As always, connect to the present moment, to yourself and your children. I am Anna Seewald. Thank you so much for listening.